I'm presenting a problem about using Sklearn's predefined split for stratified k-fold cross-validation. We'll use a dataset with 100 samples, splitting it into an 80-sample training set and a 20-sample testing set. I've predefined test fold indices as test_fold equals 0, *80 plus 1, *20 . This means the first 80 elements are 0 and the last 20 elements are 1. I want you to tell me which statements are correct about using this with predefined split and cross_val_score . Let's see if you can ace this. This statement describes how the data is split based on the test_fold array I defined. The first 80 samples, all zeros in the array, go to training, and the last 20, all ones, go to testing. Absolutely. Predefined split uses the test_fold array to create exactly two folds, one for training and one for testing, based on the zeros and ones. That's correct. When you have a custom cross-validation strategy, like predefined split you need to tell cross_val_score explicitly by setting the CV parameter to your predefined split object. Nope, that's incorrect. Predefined split just uses the indices I give it. It doesn't automatically ensure stratified sampling. To get stratified sampling, I'd need to create a stratified split before building my test_fold array. This simply explains that I have 100 samples. The representation 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 80 zeros, 20 ones. Visually shows my 80 training samples and 20 testing samples. This question tests your understanding of how Sklearn, PredefinedSplit works for splitting data into training and testing sets for cross-validation. I'll focus on explaining how you use a predefined split to control this process. We have a dataset with 100 samples. This is our starting point, the total number of data points I'm working with. This line defines how I'm splitting my data. I create a list called testfold. I use the asterisk operator to repeat the number 0 80 times, followed by repeating the number 1 20 times. This means the first 80 samples are assigned to the training set, 0, and the last 20 samples are assigned to the test set, 1. It's a simple but powerful way to predefine my cross-validation folds. Here, I create a PredefinedSplit object using the testfold list I just created. This object tells Sklearn exactly how to divide the data into training and testing sets without any randomization or automatic stratification. This statement is absolutely correct. Because of how I constructed testfold, the first 80 data points are clearly designated for training, and the last 20 are set aside for testing. This is also correct. PredefinedSplit uses the list of zeros and ones to define exactly two folds, one for training and one for testing. There's no more to it than that. This statement is incorrect. PredefinedSplit itself does not perform stratified sampling. It simply uses the predefined splits you give it. If you need stratified sampling, you would need to do that separately before creating the testfold array. This is correct. When using a custom cross-validation strategy like PredefinedSplit, you must explicitly pass the PredefinedSplit object to the CV parameter of functions such as crossvalscore. It's crucial to specify this so Sklearn knows you're not using the default cross-validation method. I use Sklearn's PredefinedSplit to create custom splits for cross-validation. It lets me define exactly which data points go into training and testing sets, giving me more control than the usual automated methods. This line creates a list called testfold. I'm adding 80 zeros, followed by 20 ones. Each number represents a data point. 0 means training data, and 1 means testing data. So, the first 80 data points are assigned to the training set, and the last 20 to the testing set. I have a dataset with 100 samples. That's my starting point for the experiment. 80 data points are used for training my machine learning model. The remaining 20 data points will be used to test the performance of my trained model. I'll evaluate how well the model generalizes to unseen data. I use PredefinedSplit to control how Sklearn divides my data for cross-validation. It lets me pre-specify which data points go into training and testing sets, instead of relying on Sklearn's default methods. This gives me more control over my experiment. I have a dataset with 100 samples. Think of each sample as one piece of information. I'll divide it to evaluate my machine learning model effectively. This line creates a list called test_fold. It assigns the value 0 to the first 80 elements, representing the training set, and 1 to the last 20 elements, representing the testing set. It's like assigning labels. 0 means train, and 1 means test. I'm using 80 samples to train my model. This is the data my model learns from. I hope it learns well. I'm using the remaining 20 samples to test my model after training. This tests the model's ability to generalize to unseen data. I'll evaluate how well it performs. This statement is correct. My test_fold list directly dictates that the first 80 samples, labeled 0, are for training. This is also correct. Based on the zeros and ones in test_fold PredefinedSplit creates exactly two sets. One for training and one for testing. Incorrect. PredefinedSplit simply uses what I've given it. It doesn't perform stratified sampling on its own. If I need stratified sampling, I would have to do it beforehand, creating a stratified test_fold list. This is right. When using PredefinedSplit I need to explicitly tell cross_val_score a function for evaluating model performance, to use my custom split by passing the PredefinedSplit object to its CV parameter. It's important. I'm using Sklearn's PredefinedSplit for cross-validation. It lets me define my training and testing sets beforehand, instead of letting the computer randomly split them. This gives me more control over the process. This line creates a list called testfold. I'm assigning 0 80 times and 1 20 times. This list tells PredefinedSplit which samples are for training, 0, and which are for testing, 1. Think of it as a label for each of my 100 data points. I'm creating a PredefinedSplit object. I'm feeding it the testfold list I just made. This object now knows exactly how I want to split my data. The first 80 samples in my dataset are designated for training the model. They're the ones labeled 0 in my testfold list. The last 20 samples are for testing the trained model. These are the samples labeled 1 in my testfold list. This is a function, like crossvalScore, from Sklearn that does the cross-validation. I'll use it to evaluate my model's performance. Here, I'm setting the CV parameter of that cross-validation function. The CV parameter tells the function how to split the data. I'm setting it to my PredefinedSplit object to use my custom split. It's important to set this explicitly. This is the multiple-choice question that tests my understanding of how PredefinedSplit works with the testfold I defined. I use Sklearn's PredefinedSplit to perform cross-validation. It lets me define the training and testing sets myself, instead of relying on Sklearn's automatic splitting. I have a dataset with 100 samples. That's my total data for this experiment. I create a list called testfold. It tells the PredefinedSplit which samples go to which set. 80 zeros mean the first 80 samples are for training. 20 ones mean the last 20 are for testing. I create a PredefinedSplit object using my testfold list. This object now tells Sklearn exactly how I want my data split for cross-validation. The first 80 samples from my dataset are used for training the machine learning model. The final 20 samples are kept aside for testing, after the model has been trained. This statement is correct based on how I defined TESTFOLD. I explicitly assigned the first 80 samples to training and the last 20 to testing. Because of how I set up TESTFOLD, PREDEFINEDSPLIT makes only two folds, one for training and one for testing. This is incorrect. PREDEFINEDSPLIT simply uses the provided indices. It doesn't do stratified sampling on its own. I would need to do stratified sampling before creating the TESTFOLD list if I wanted that. That's right. When using a custom cross-validation strategy like PREDEFINEDSPLIT with CROSSVALSCORE, I must tell CROSSVALSCORE specifically to use the PREDEFINEDSPLIT object by passing it to the CV parameter. I'm using scikit-learn's PREDEFINEDSPLIT for cross-validation. This lets me specify exactly which data points go into the training and testing sets, giving me more control than the usual random splitting methods. It's like pre-arranging teams for a tournament instead of randomly assigning players. I have 100 data points to work with. Think of each one as a single observation or measurement. This array tells me which samples belong to which set. A 0 means that sample is in the training set, and a 1 means it's in the testing set. My array has 80 zeros followed by 20 ones, defining the split. I'm using the PREDEFINEDSPLIT function from scikit-learn, and I am feeding it my test_fold array. This function will use this array to define the exact samples for training and testing sets. The first 80 samples in my dataset will be used to train my model. The remaining 20 samples will be used to evaluate my model's performance after training. I'm using a cross-validation function, such as CROSSVALSCORE, to evaluate my model's performance. This helps to avoid overfitting. The CV parameter in cross-validation functions specifies the cross-validation strategy. Here, it's my PREDEFINEDSPLIT object that dictates the training and testing set division. After the cross-validation, I'll get metrics, like accuracy, precision, recall, to assess how well my model generalizes to unseen data.